In the arid wilderness, where the sun beats down without mercy, 3 kings and their mighty armies found themselves on the brink of disaster. King Joram of Israel, King Jehoshaphat of Judah, and the king of Edom had united their forces. Their goal? To crush the rebellious nation of Moab. Their march was confident, their spirits high. But pride often precedes a fall. They took a long, circuitous route through the desert of Edom, a calculated move to surprise their enemy. But the desert has its own plans. 7 days they marched, and the land grew drier with every step. Their water supplies, once abundant, dwindled to nothing. The soldiers' throats were parched, their tongues swollen. The horses and cattle, essential for their campaign, collapsed from thirst. The once mighty alliance was now a dying caravan, trapped by their own strategy, surrounded by nothing but sand and silence. The threat wasn't the Moabite army anymore. It was the slow, agonizing death that stalked them under the relentless sun. Desperation clawed at their hearts. King Joram, the son of the wicked Ahab, looked at his suffering army and cried out in despair. Has the Lord brought us 3 kings together only to hand us over to Moab? His faith was as barren as the desert around him. He saw only doom, a divine trap laid just for them. But Jehoshaphat, the righteous king of Judah, refused to surrender to hopelessness. His spirit, though tested, held firm. Is there no prophet of the Lord here? He demanded, that we may inquire of the Lord through him. He knew that even in the deepest pit of despair, God's voice could still be found. A servant of King Joram spoke up, mentioning a name that carried immense weight. Elisha, the man who had poured water on the hands of the great prophet Elijah. Hope, like a single drop of water, appeared in the desolate camp. The 3 kings, humbled and desperate, went to find the prophet. They found Elisha, a man whose eyes burned with the fire of righteousness. When he saw Joram, the idol-worshipping king of Israel, his face hardened. What have I to do with you? Elisha's voice was sharp, cutting through the desert heat. Go to the prophets of your father and the prophets of your mother. His anger was not for a king in need, but for a king who only turned to God in desperation after years of blatant disobedience. Joram pleaded, his royal pride stripped away, but Elisha was unmoved. It was only out of respect for the faithful King Jehoshaphat that he relented. As surely as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, Elisha declared, if I did not have respect for the presence of Jehoshaphat king of Judah, I would not look at you or even notice you. Then, the prophet's demeanor shifted. The anger subsided, replaced by a focused intensity. But now, he commanded, bring me a harpist. A musician was brought forth, and as his fingers plucked the strings, a melody drifted through the silent, thirsty camp. The music seemed to calm the very air, and as it played, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Elisha. His eyes saw beyond the dust and the dying men. A divine command came from his lips, a command that must have sounded like madness to the desperate kings. This is what the Lord says. Make this valley full of ditches. Ditches? They needed water, not holes in the ground. Their men were too weak to even stand, let alone dig. Yet, the prophecy continued. You will see neither wind nor rain. Yet this valley will be filled with water, and you, your cattle, and your other animals will drink. And then came the promise of victory. This is an easy thing in the eyes of the Lord. He will also deliver Moab into your hands. With a flicker of renewed hope, the soldiers obeyed. They dug. With their last ounces of strength, they carved trenches into the dry, cracked turf of the valley floor. They worked through the night, their bodies aching, their throats still burning, with no sign of wind or rain. The next morning, at the time of the morning sacrifice, it happened. A silent flood, water, flowing from the direction of Edom, crept into the valley. It filled the first ditch, then the second, then all of them, until the entire valley floor was a network of life-giving pools. There was no storm, no sound, just a quiet, impossible miracle. The armies drank, their animals drank, and life returned to the camp. Meanwhile, the Moabites had heard of the approaching armies from their vantage point. As the sun rose, they looked down into the valley. What they saw stunned them. The water in the ditches, reflecting the crimson light of the dawn, looked exactly like blood. A wave of triumphant excitement surged through the Moabite ranks. That's blood, they cried. The kings have surely fought and slaughtered each other. Now to the plunder, Moab. Convinced their enemies had self-destructed, they abandoned all caution. They charged down into the valley, a disorganized, greedy mob, expecting to find corpses and treasure. Instead, they ran straight into a trap. The refreshed and battle-ready armies of Israel, Judah, and Edom rose from their positions and fell upon the Moabites with ferocious power. The ambush was perfect. The Moabites, caught completely by surprise, were routed and fled in terror. The allied armies pursued them, devastating their towns, ruining their fields and stopping up their springs. The victory was total, the miracle complete. But the story takes one final, horrifying turn. The king of Moab, pushed to the absolute edge of defeat, performed a desperate, unspeakable act. On the walls of his last stronghold, in full view of the Israelite army, he took his firstborn son, his heir, and sacrificed him as a burnt offering to his God. The sight was so horrific, so spiritually repulsive, that a great wrath came upon the Israelites. They were overcome with horror and immediately withdrew. They broke off the attack and returned to their own land. The victory, secured by a miracle, was left hanging, tainted by an act of ultimate darkness. The story ends not with a triumphant celebration, but with a sobering retreat, a stark reminder that even in the midst of God's miraculous power, the spiritual battle rages on, and the depths of human desperation can lead to unimaginable horror. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more.